So we can explore some literary theories for the shape of things. And one we're definitely going to see, I put this as a link that you can look at, is our disability rights. And this story was published in 1948. And if we know World War II, here we have in the 1940s, disabled world veterans place increasing pressure because many of these World War II vets would have come back with disabilities or issues with their um, some of them might have been amputees or had some other issue that would have hampered their ability to work. So for this, I could say something like Ray Bradbury was attempting to shed light on the treatment that, oops, uh-oh, I'll say here. I could say Ray Bradbury was attempting to shed light on the treatment that disabled veterans were receiving upon coming home after World War II. And then I would use a quote. So that could be a historical analysis that Ray Bradbury was taking what was happening in history, that veterans were out there trying to advocate for their rights. We can also, critical race obviously would have this, you look different. If the story were to be viewed as an allegory, then Pi would be given the distinction of a minority group that was subjugated and oppressed in society. And that would be an allegory, a critical race theory. But this would have been the 1940s. And this might have had to do with Jewish people. This could be a Holocaust. It could be a Holocaust, or we could also be talking about a colonial group. You could give it, well, that would be a post colonial. So critical race theory is really a group in America that was being discriminated, which in the 1940s, women, black Americans, Asian Americans, really anybody that wasn't a white male, you could say. Feminists. This has a lot of feminist ways to critique it, right? Like when we see Dr. Wolcott here, and we can say the mere fact, the story sheds light on the ways in which women were discriminated and belittled by healthcare professionals in the, we could say, throughout the 1900s. And considering that the story is basically about birth, you could also find a article, maybe we could look up like history of women being abused in healthcare. I'm sure that things, medicine and wife abuse in the 1970s. This would be medical neglect. Histories, how women's words and bodies, wait. So this one, ooh, this could be good, by Mistreated. And this would be the National Health Council. And it would basically go into the United States, of course, many sex and gender disparities and the poor treatment of women in the medical field. So I could add this, and this would be a source that we could use when we are going to write our criticism. And there's lots of evidence throughout the text. Dr. Walcott is hostile and verbally abusive towards Mrs. Horn. We can even say he also keeps secrets from her, including Pi's health condition and her own infertility. That was really bad when he did that. Oh, definitely. All right. And then we can also, this Marxist, you could say like Mr. Horn's career keeps him away from Pi and Mrs. and Polly. This creates a lot of tension in their house, in their relationship, because Polly is isolated, home alone with Pi. Not only this, but we could say here that Pi's condition is not hurting anyone but those that have to look at him. Actually, it's not. I won't even say that. We could say Pi's condition causes no harm to anyone, including Pi, and merely, and the doctor is concerned primarily over the well being of others who have to interact with Pi. The Horns, we could say, fret over their son's differences could stem from the capitalist ideologies. I could just say stem from capitalist ideologies because his physical appearance will hinder his ability to earn an income later in life. So there could really be two ways we look at this from Marxists. Number one, maybe this situation wouldn't have been so bad if Peter, or if Paul, if Peter, if Peter didn't keep going to work, if he didn't have to go earn this money and work outside of the home for whatever place he was working for, he could have been at home with his wife and his child. We could also say that one of the reasons they're so upset is obviously the dad works in sales, so this physical appearance would really be off putting. Reader response, we could really do a lot. As a mother, mine might be different than someone who wasn't a mother. The story shows, I could make this controversial, how a mother will often bond with a child prior to their birth into the physical world. In the story, it is obvious to readers that Mr. Horn takes quite some time to develop feelings of paternal love for Pi. However, Polly exhibits immediate maternal devotion. That could be mine. I'm going to make a response that says, this is a story about how mothers love their children more than fathers. Kind of controversial. Ooh, psychoanalysis. That's the alcoholism. There was a lot of drinking going on in the story. So we could say something like, after Peter and Polly's child is born with a physical deformity, I guess you could say this, they both develop alcohol problems. So I could maybe make a lens saying that this is a bad thing to say, but oftentimes when couples face difficult challenges in life, they may turn separately to alcohol in order to cope rather than relying on each other. And then you could say this is seen through the story's conflict because Peter Horn, we could say, becomes abusive towards his wife, Polly as they deal with their child's upcoming surgical procedure, right? Because that's really what they're waiting for here. So, a psychoanalysis, I'm looking at the mind of these characters, and technically, the mind of the characters had an alcohol issue. Post colonial, this you could say, give it an allegory. Same with the critical race. We could give this an allegory and say that pi is a person living in another region of the world seen totally different. And notice too, like the characters are able to see human and shapes, whereas pi, of course he can't. His mind just doesn't work. You could say this is a colonial allegory. Affliction, the whole situation with pi. It explores how impairments affect society or family unit. So you could say this story's message shows readers how a physical deformity or health issue with one family member can have drastic effects on everyone. And then you can make it more general and saying, like, if any family member has a physical deformity or issue, it could result in an increased stressors for the family unit. And those would be our different types of literary analyses here. And quick with this one. So the resolution is Polly, and Peter embrace one another in the other dimension. The following action is Peter takes Polly and Pi to Dr. Walcott to undergo the procedure early. Dr. Walcott informs them that they will be traveling to Pi's dimension and that Polly is now infertile. That was super messed up. Your climax here, Polly, we could say Peter returns home from work to find Polly intoxicated in the front yard, displaying pie to all the neighbors. And then we would say this results in a domestic abuse situation when Peter beats up Polly in the front lawn and demands Dr. Walcott immediately do the procedure. And that really had nothing to do with pie. It was all the horn, specifically Peter. And then a rising action is them taking Pie home and all of the events. Pie saying wheelie, we could say the couple brings Pie home and begin drinking heavily. They did do that. We could say Pie says Peter's name first, which causes Polly to become increasingly sarcastic, abusive, and irritated. Because that was really the catalyst, kind of, for her having her in the yard freak out. The reader learns that the Horn family recently had a baby. However, the doctors need to inform Peter that their baby is a blue pyramid shape, which is just crazy. And then they informed, you could also say Dr. Walcott informs Polly about Pie's condition, which results in her being very guilty and worrying that it was her fault. I might even put in here, this results in Peter asking the doctors to euthanize the child. that would mean kill it because that is what he said. So that would be our parts of the plot. The allegory, like I said, you could just give a pie a meaning in society, and even Polly could be like represent mothers or people that advocate for the disabled, whereas Peter could represent those that are more of a survival of the fittest mentality. Illusion, ooh, this one, can't miss it. James Joyce. When Pie says daddy for the first time, Polly becomes sarcastically abusive to Peter, joking that Pie was going to be the next James Joyce. James Joyce is a famous Irish writer. So that would be an allusion to another famous writer. And also, it was mean. Our irony is in order to um, accept their own child's appearance, the horns must enter another dimension and be shunned from the world. You could say, rather than accepting their child's differences, the horns chose to isolate themselves entirely. They could have just maybe, I don't know, tried to get people not to be so mean to their own kids, and then they wouldn't have had to go into this other world. The foreshadowing, the shape of things, we could say the title of the story foreshadows that the characters would all end up in shapes other than human form. You could say the title. There would be others ones that Dr. Walcott was not going to be able to figure out how to do this. Just Dr. Walcott's general demeanor. How was he going to do this? He was definitely foreshadowed from the start a terrible doctor. Um, the shapes are motif. They can also be a symbol of Pie's difference or otherness. Um, then for the tone, we have this concept of challenges, so reflective and thought provoking. You might be thinking here, what if this was me? Maybe that's why people aren't so judgmental of Peter. The mood, I would say my mood reading this is depressing but hopeful because obviously it's a sad story that the parents have to go through all this and that medical technology couldn't fix this for them. Another, you could say that's your character versus technology. Also, the character versus society. The horns have a child that will be shunned from society. That really is the heart from society. And even the doctor is saying, giving them these rules. And then we have Dr. Walcott. I have intelligent, kind of, just because he's a doctor, but he is disrespectful and judgmental. And then I have Mr. Horn being judgmental and unkind. And then I characterize Mrs. Horn as selfless and loving. Maybe I'm biased. Whatever you would say, as long as you're backing it up with evidence from the text, you can have entirely different answers, whatever you think. And then here, for the perspective or point of view, I wanted to put in here that at times we're switching to Pie's point of view. So that's going to tell us that Pie was a perfectly normal baby that required no special things, like unless maybe some understanding, but that was about it. Here is your example when it's switching from Pie's point of view. So we have third person, limited point of view.